Cascade Mycological Society meeting. I am Cheshire Harrison, your president. It's good to see you all. I hope you're well. Hearts go out to those affected by the fires. I have a few announcements. So September 20th at 7 p.m. is our annual meeting via Zoom. Please vote for the board of directors, even if you attend. Yes, we will be having a virtual mushroom show this year. As usual, it will be the last Sunday in October, and keep an eye on the website for more information. Our own Ron Hamill lost his home in my college lab to the Archie fire. A fundraiser has been set up for him. Check the CMS Facebook page or your email for more info. Ron has been with CMS since the beginning. We rely on his expertise as one of the chief identifiers for the mushroom show. Please do your best dance, both for the mushrooms and the end of the fires. Due to the extreme fire danger, the Willamette, Siuslaw, Umpqua, and Klamath National Forests and BLM lands in Western Oregon are all closed to recreation at this time. There are also closed areas in the Deschutes and Siskiyou forests, and many state parks are closed as well. So if you're going to go out, check in advance, see if it's open. Once the rain starts, we're going to do forays in small groups. Everyone will drive their own car, and masks will be required when talking in a group. We will try to have frequent forays, so we're looking for leaders, and we look forward to seeing you on a foray. So with that, I'll introduce our speakers tonight. Trent and Kristen Blizzard are speakers tonight. They're amazing foragers and mushroomers. From their home base in Colorado, they travel all over the West and Midwest foraging. They have the Modern Forager website with extensive current information on foraging. Their website is an excellent source of maps of the wildfires analyzed to determine where you are most likely to find morels. They have a new book, Wild Mushrooms, a book and foraging guide, with great information on preserving and cooking your finds. This is available pre-sale. With that, I'll turn it over to them.
Thank you, Cheshire. Hi, I'm Trent Blizzard, and I'm here with Kristen. Say hi, Kristen.
Hey, everyone.
I think I'll be doing most of the presenting, and Kristen is going to watch the YouTube chat closely and answer any questions or provide any links or extra information. So I would encourage you to hop into the chat there and ask any questions. There is a little delay, curiously, so I think I'm 30 seconds ahead of the actual YouTube video right now. So gosh, I'd like to start with a little bit of an introduction about the two of us. We live in Glenwood Springs, Colorado, and we've been foraging now for gonna say 8 years. Pretty hard. I mean, we grew up kind of exposed to it, but really got excited about it when we probably about 8 years ago. And we come to Oregon twice a year. In the spring and the fall. We like to come out around Memorial Day, maybe a week or two ahead, a week or two behind, and hunt burn morels usually, and some natural morels, and spring porcini. And then we also come out in the fall. We have a little camping pad in Reedsport, Oregon on the coast. So we like to come spend a month there. And it seems like every year we spend a little more time there as the years kind of go on. We extend our trip further and further. So we hope to be out there again this fall, although it's been a crazy year with the virus and now the fires. And I know it's a difficult time in Oregon. So hopefully we'll get to see a lot of our friends out there this fall if we make it out. What we've done recently is we wrote a cookbook. It's called Wild Mushrooms, a foraging guide and cookbook. And in that, we feature 17 specific types of edible mushrooms. Of those, I think 13 are very commonly found in Oregon. And we have for each mushroom, we have a lot of information on preservation. And then we interviewed 25 different foragers, several of which are local there to to you guys and either are part of your society or in Oregon or the Pacific Northwest, and we tell their stories, and then they all shared recipes with us, which we cooked up and photographed and made that into a cookbook. So it was a fun project we were able to complete during the quarantine period and send it off to our publisher, and the books are about to land here in our garage, hopefully in a week or two, and in bookstores as well and Amazon, and we'll be able to send them out. Now, if you're watching this, we're going to do a giveaway here at the end. We're going to give away a copy of the cookbook. Let's see if I can share that screen here. Do you think you can turn on my screen sharing so I can share a few pictures, Sandy? I don't seem to be able to do screen sharing right now. No big deal though if we can't. I have lots of props here and to show during this presentation as we go through I think I'm going to cover 13 different mushrooms that you find in Oregon, and talk about and focus on the preservation techniques for each of them. Now, there's a lot of preservation techniques to discuss. The real obvious ones like dehydrating, and then some newer and more unusual ones. And I'm going to try to focus during this talk on the mushrooms themselves and work through the mushrooms and talk about the best way to do the preservations on those. I'm going to save some of the preservation techniques as we go though, because I'm going to start with morels. And you could go through almost every single preservation technique with morels. One of the wonderful thing about the morel is that it preserves very well. All the different ways that you can preserve mushrooms, morels really respond well to and reward the technique. So for that reason, I really like to dehydrate morels. And part of that is when we talk about these other techniques, they require a lot of energy to either complete or to store your final product. And it's pretty nice to be able to have a mushroom that you can just dehydrate and store right from that technique, which just, you don't have to freeze it or keep it in the refrigerator or anything like that. So when we dehydrate, we use pretty run-of-the-mill big box bought dehydration machines. I think we use the Presto brand with the stackable trays, and we buy extra trays, and it works well, and you can set the temperatures on them. But I don't think you need to be too particular about which dehydrating machine you use. They all seem to work pretty well. Everybody has their favorites. And when we dehydrate them though, I like to set the temperature as low as I can and still run it typically overnight. So what that means to me is if I have 2 trays of morels, I can set the temperature at 125 and run it overnight, and they're going to be dry in the morning. However, if I have 12 trays, it's going to have to run a little longer than overnight, and I'll set the temperature higher. I might go as high as 160 for a really full machine of wet product, and as low as 125 or even lower for some mushrooms for a smaller load in the dehydrator. There's a lot of talk online about dehydration temperatures affecting the nutritional value of mushrooms. And I've looked into that and haven't really found it to be really convincing one way or the other. So I go at about 140 when I can. That's my standard temperature. And when I dehydrate, I try to get them to like a cracker-like consistency where they don't bend, they're not flexible. I can kind of snap them if I want to. Now, I know I'm talking about morels here, but one of the interesting things, and I'm going to show a porcini as an example, is if you air dry your mushrooms a little bit in the sun before you dehydrate them, you'll have the benefit of, oh, there, I've got the share screen back. Let me just pull that up. So I have a picture of dehydrating here. One of the, there's the cookbook. You can see that. And here's a field dehydrator. So you can see porcinis and morels in that. That's in the spring, and that's in Oregon. And we've found that if you air dry your product like this a little bit in the sun, you get 2 benefits. Benefit number 1 is it will reduce your dehydration time because you release some of the moisture naturally. The second benefit is kind of cool though. I'm going to open up this jar here and pull out kind of a big a big chunky porcini here. This is a spring porcini from Oregon, Boletus rex veris. And see how brown it is? When I put them in the sun and dry a little bit, they tend to get this nice brown color, which doesn't, it's nice in the flavor. It tastes good. But what I think is also happening is the sun pushes a lot of vitamin D into these mushrooms, or they have a reaction to the sun and they actually become more nutritious. So one tip I'd like to recommend is, if you're in the right environment, is do a little bit of sun drying or air drying first before the dehydrator. And I think you'll get a pretty nutritious product. I still like to put it in the dehydrator and finish it off, because what I find is if you have one mushroom that's not really fully dried, you will wreck an entire batch of dehydrated product. Now, I know we all dehydrate. It's not really rocket science, but I got a couple of fun tips or ways that I do it. The first thing I want to show you is how I store them. You can see this jar here. It's almost empty. I like to fill these jars up. This is porcinis. And I keep the lid on tight, so that provides a pretty good air-safe environment. However, what I use is inside of the jar, I like to drop these little desiccant packs, and these are food safe. I buy them on Amazon here, and they come in big bags like this. They're pretty inexpensive. And I do that to make sure that I don't have a bad one that is going to wreck the rest of them in there. And many of you in Oregon also live in a humid environment, and a few desiccant packs can really make your mushrooms last quite a bit longer when they're dried. Now, when they are dried, my experience has been they last a long time. And in fact, the flavors will evolve over time. And a 10 or 15-year-old porcini that you've stored properly is a wonderful thing. And a morel is going to be the exact same way. Now, what I do for long-term storage is a little different. Let me back up. I've got a lot of stuff here. I'll pull out. This right here is going to be the wrong way to do it. This is a Ziploc bag of morels. And what I find is if you store in Ziploc bags, they're kind of air permeable, and your dried mushrooms start to lose some of their flavor and they just don't store as well and keep as nice. So I store them in the jars, but what I do for long-term storage is I put them in the jars, but I hope to eat these in 6 months, say. For long-term storage, pull this out. I actually have, I use one of these. For some of these, I use my food safe bucket with my nice lid on it. That's probably overkill, because the secret is really inside. I pack my morels into really high quality sealable plastic bags. Now, I think you can do the same with the jars, but the important thing is to use these really good plastic bags. So these are from 2020. These are from the Cal Fire, which was there in Oregon. And here are, well, I've got lots of bigger bags in here. They come in all different sizes, dried morels. And when I put them in these bags, I do something a little different. First of all, I vacuum seal them. So I'm sucking the air out of these as much as possible. However, they're often a little loose. I don't suck so much air out that they start breaking the mushrooms, because if you really run your vacuum sealer hard, what will happen is you'll crush your dried mushrooms with all that contraction force, and you'll probably poke holes in the plastic from the sharp edges of the mushrooms. I learned that the hard way. The first year I did this, I had to reseal quite a few of my mushrooms because I had actually put holes in the plastic. What I add to them then, to my dried morels, are these. Now I'll open this up. I store these in a closed glass jar. And these are oxygen removers. I don't know what the right word is, scrubbers. And when you put these in a jar instead of a desiccant pack, they will actually remove the oxygen from the air in that jar environment, or in my case, the plastic bag environment. And without oxygen, the food will keep a lot longer. Now, this comes from preppers, people that want to store their food for like 20 or 25 years. They use a lot of these oxygen packs to help their food last a lot longer. And I've had really good luck with these. I feel like if I put these in a good plastic bag, and seal it up, or even a jar and seal it up, my dried products will last a lot longer. And then when I start using that product, I put it into, another jar, and this jar gets open and closed all the time. And I'll just put desiccants in there to protect them from moisture in the air. Some people, when they cook with their dehydrated mushrooms, do like to pull their mushrooms out and let them absorb humidity from the air for a day or two. I haven't known if my palate is fine enough to do this, but they swear that it really brings a little extra flavor out of their mushrooms. By the way, that might be something to consider with candy caps, because the dehydration process is more important there. We're going to talk about that later. Let's see. The other thing I like to do is when I seal these guys up, my dehydrated product, I like to use these bags. I often pre-buy the bags already cut. They're already sealed on one end and ready to use, and I find them really convenient. I'm going to show later on how I freeze with them. They can come in a roll like this, and you can cut them to size as well and freeze the top and the bottom, and this is also economical. But the other thing I do is we camp a lot. And we have a camper, and I might be processing mushrooms and want to store them while in the field. And I've had really good luck with one of these guys right here. This is a portable vacuum sealer. This is the Food Saver brand. And when you push the button, it runs and it vacuums out the air. So let me show you that. Let's see here. So they go into, when you use these, you got to buy these special bags, and that's kind of the drag. These bags to seal in are, you have to buy the Food Saver brand that have these little holes on top of them. So I think maybe I'll save that and talk about that, because I like to freeze in these when I'm in the field. I think I'll come back to this in just a little bit when I want to talk about freezing and how I use that particular thing. So for morels, we've kind of covered dehydration, and it really works for a lot of mushrooms. I'll go through which ones it does and doesn't work as we work through the mushrooms. But I will say morels freeze very well. They freeze dry very well. They pickle very well. You can do a lot with them. I did a taste test earlier this year with a fresh, a frozen, a dehydrated, and a freeze-dried morel, and they were all very similar. In fact, I would say that the dehydrated one had a really nice flavor, and it was almost in some ways preferable to everything but the fresh. But it wasn't far off. So I don't think you can go wrong with any technique for preserving your morel. It's just dehydration makes the most sense. All right. The next topic would be porcini, the other really, really big mushroom that you find a lot of in Oregon, and offers a lot of preservation options. And like the morel, the porcini enjoys and does well in many different preservation techniques. I specifically want to talk about a few techniques with the porcini beyond dehydrating. However, when it comes to how I preserve my porcini, the major factor is the quality of the mushroom. When I get the small, what are they, grade A buttons, they tend to have white or really light yellow pores on the bottom. They're typically quite hard. They might be rock hard almost. I often will do special things with those. And then the bigger ones, I almost always dehydrate. I find the bigger they are, the more they like to be dehydrated. It seems to shrink them down and compress the flavor and improves the texture. However, the thing with porcinis is when you dehydrate them, the flavor changes. So if you eat a fresh porcini and a dried porcini together, you'll see they have very different flavors. And the dried one has a very earthy flavor, which is great. Honestly, though, I think I probably prefer the fresh taste a little more. I don't dislike the dried one, but what I do with the porcinis that has really worked well is I freeze them. So let me pull some of those out here. There's a couple ways to freeze porcini. And this goes against what a lot of people say. And here's an example. This is 1 pound of porcini buttons, very high quality porcinis. And what I did was I chopped them up. There were no worms in these. They were very good. I laid them out on a pan, like a cookie tray, and I put them in the freezer, and they weren't really touching much, and gave them about 2 hours, and they froze rock hard. After they froze, I then packed them in a bag, a 1 pound bag is how I did them. And these are from July 28th, and they will last in the fridge for a year, in the freezer for a year, no problem, and be quite good. I'm really shocked at how nicely these, how they thaw. I usually put them on the counter for maybe an hour before I put them in the pan, and they might still be a little frozen at that point. If I'm in a hurry, I'll put them in some cold or warm water bath to speed it up. I put them right into a pan, usually without any oil, and I start sauteing them up. They release their liquid, and then I might start adding oil and things like that and browning them. But oh my gosh, they're really good. They're delightful, and I'm surprised more people don't freeze their fresh porcini. So that's one way to freeze. When you're going to freeze mushrooms, if you want to freeze fresh ones, is to lay them out and only put them back together in a package in nice plastic, by the way, not Ziplocs, after they're frozen. The next way we like to freeze is, let me pull that out here. All right, here's an example of more porcinis that have been frozen in plastic. It's a exact same bag. It's a little smaller, and there's actually quite a few more in here than in the fresh one. And this is the most economical way to do it, freezing, because if you saute them like this first, and I saute them in just a little bit of butter, maybe, or oil, and right about when they start giving up their liquid in the pan, I might pull them out, and I think that's what I did here, and I'll freeze them in that liquid after they're kind of lightly sauteed. Or I might cook them a little more and let them reabsorb the liquid in the pan and then freeze them. Both techniques work, but that's how I know when to stop. Somehow when the pan is either full of liquid or right when the liquid leaves the pan, sometime in that time frame, I freeze them. I kind of like the liquid in here, frankly, so it's probably more what I prefer to do. I don't know that it's any better though. And this is going to have more than a pound of porcini. They lose so much of their size after you cook them that you can put a lot of these in the freezer this way. Now, here's a secret with these. Look how flat they are. When you freeze your mushrooms, make sure that you kind of prep your plastic and get everything nice and flat before you seal it. And you can fit way more of these in your freezer, and you can stack them in there one after another and have a very organized freezer and store a lot more product than if they're not flat. All right. Let me see what else I had here about freezing. So we can freeze them raw. We can saute them and then freeze them. If you're in a big hurry and you've got a whole bunch, you might want to try roasting them instead of sauteing them. You can fill a roasting pan with the porcinis and put them in the oven. And so when you roast, you're going to be at 400 degrees maybe. And you can process a lot more that way, an entire tray's full. And also the roasted porcinis give a pretty good flavor. I really like the flavor of the roasted porcini too, but remember, I'm only doing this with the higher quality grade A, the real firm porcini, not the big kind of, mealy is not the right word, but they get big and soft. And for those, I dehydrate, and it's not really a preservation technique, but boy, I love a big old porcini on the grill is just delightful. That's even when we're picking beautiful porcinis that everybody desires, we almost always try to throw 1 or 2 or 3 older ones in our bag, just so when we get home, we can maybe put a little oil on them, maybe marinate them a little bit, put them on the grill, and they're awesome. So that's something you'll probably want to do. Now, if anybody has any questions, feel free to pop them down there in the chat about this. Now I want to show this idea of the field freezing. If you have a camper, or maybe you don't have a full one, this is where you can put use these bags to freeze in and remove the air with one of these. These are a little expensive. They're like 50 to 60 bucks online. There are many other brands that make the exact same thing, a little battery powered or rechargeable vacuum sealer, and you can get them for a lot cheaper than this. I don't think the brand really matters, as long as you get these bags that have these holes in them that work that way. Let's see what else I got here. So while I'm on the topic of that machine, this is really cool. I'm going to pull out a jar here. Let's hear. Here's a jar of Matsutake. I'm going to open it up. These are freeze dried. We'll talk about that here in a bit. They smell really good. And what you can do is you can put just the lid on these jars, and then you get this little attachment that goes with those freeze dry or those vacuum sealers, and you just put it on there. And I'm going to do this right now. Okay, I'm going to, Laura, I'll get to your question in just a sec. You put that on there, and then you put it on here. You hear the sound change there. I hope a little bit. I think I got it on there. You pull that off, and now it is. Did you hear that pop? It vacuum sealed. So I'll just do that again and leave it that way for now. So yeah, it's really a little better that time. I sucked so much air out of there that this jar of mushrooms is now going to last a lot longer because it's not being exposed to as much oxygen. And when you put an oxygen pack in there, it's even better. So that's a really cool technique to easily get your jars to last a little longer. And you can do it with a lot of different food products. Now, Laura, you asked about the name of the packets that I put in the morel jars. I do the two types. These are just desiccants. These are food safe desiccants. Make sure when you buy them, that's what you get. I always put one in a jar, like always. They're cheap, so I just throw, I don't hesitate using them. And if for some reason I'm maybe not 100% sure that I got everything dried, super dry, or I'm in an environment that's moist where I'm collecting, I might put a few more than one in there. They work great though. The other one I use is this one. And these are oxygen scrubbers. They remove oxygen from the morel jars. I don't know exactly what those are called. They're called oxygen absorbers. It says do not eat, don't eat them, but they are food safe, and do not microwave them either. By the way, there is another tip here. I should have mentioned this. Never combine the two of them in one container. They don't play well together. So you're not doing yourself any favors by putting them both in a jar. Only do one. I'm going to put this guy back into my jar and close it up because he's been sitting out here on the counter absorbing oxygen for the last 10 minutes. I didn't get lightheaded or anything, but I like to make sure that I keep them packed tightly and so I'm not using up their superpowers in just normal air. I want to save all their power for when I put them in the jar. All right, hopefully that answered your question, Laura. Now, in the book, we have all this in the book, and we have a lot of recipes for some of these techniques too that I'm gonna jump into. For drying, though, I think I'll talk about the other ways to preserve porcini first that I like, and I've got two really cool ways that I think you're going to enjoy. Or maybe three. This is one here. Here's a little jar of Colorado porcinis, in this case, packed in olive oil. Now, what I did here, and this is, by the way, this is the thing that when you put out for people that love mushrooms and do a lot of foraging, this product right here, people go bananas over. They always want the recipe. Of all the things that I have, I feel like people really love these. I'm going to open one up here and pull it out. It's just a little porcini. Oh, it's so good. So here's what it is. It is a vinegar and salt treated porcini. I should have brought paper towels. I'll just lick my fingers. It's so good. I'm going to put these away. I'm going to keep eating them because I really like them. And what you do with these guys is I only keep the very best porcinis for this technique. And I take them, And I cut them up into cubes, pieces, and thank you. There, now I can keep eating. And I put them in kosher salt. I think any salt will do. I just have boxes of kosher salt. That's what I try to do for most of my recipes for like an hour or two. And what happens is the salt pulls a lot of moisture out of these mushrooms. And after an hour or two, I pull them out of the kosher salt and kind of knock most of the salt off. And they've given up a lot of their moisture. And the salt is totally wet. Now I throw the salt away. And then I take the mushrooms and I boil them in white vinegar, just straight up vinegar for maybe parboil for like 10 or 15 minutes and even longer. I always feel like the longer I do it, the better the product is. And then I take them out of the vinegar and I put them on a tray. Some mechanism to air dry them with a fan on them is ideal. You can also put them in a dehydrator. And what you're trying to do is just dry them out a little more so they're like the perfect chewiness. And at this point, you'll be like, oh yeah, these are pretty good. And then when they get to the right level of chewiness, I just pack them into a jar and pour olive oil over them and store them. And I keep them in the fridge. And I try to eat them within a couple of months. You know, oil packing mushrooms can be not a sound way for long-term preservation. But for a month or 2 or 3, they work really good. I mean, gosh, I did these last fall and I'm still eating them and I'm still here, but I don't think I can responsibly recommend other people to preserve mushrooms in the long term with this, but they're so good. They're like salty and sour. And there's no reason to use a fancy vinegar. Just cheap white vinegar is the way to go with these guys. And you'll love that recipe. Now, a variation or similar type of recipe is right here. These are, I think you call confit. And what I do with these is I, again, take only the highest quality porcinis with no bugs or anything in them. And we dice them up, same as we would with the other technique. And we put them in olive oil, a really good olive oil, and we slow cook them overnight. And there's two tips here. One is you got to leave the lid off of the pot that you're cooking them in. We use like a Dutch oven. I think you could probably do it in the oven really well too at a really low temp, but we just put it on the stove top really low and just let them cook a long time. They kind of bubble a little bit and the mushrooms shrink. And over time, I guess what is happening is the water is being cooked out of the mushrooms and rising up in the olive oil and coming off. And if you leave the lid on, the oil doesn't have a way to escape the pan. And I do that for like 12 hours. And then I pack them into jars like this, and they're superb. And what's shocking about these is the oil is so darn good. This good olive oil that's been simmering mushrooms in it for 12 hours is a wonderful olive oil. It's almost better than the mushrooms, whether you put it on bread or cook food with it. It's so good. So I really treasure this olive oil that's in here. And for the mushrooms themselves, I typically, they're a little oily on the mouth. But they're great on like a quick pizza. You can spoon them out and throw them on a pizza. You can just pop them in your mouth. You can mix them into different types of salads, pasta salads. There's so much you can do with this. It's pretty convenient to pop it into a meal, but then you just got to really do good stuff with the olive oil because it's so good. So I use both of those techniques to set aside some of my really high quality grade A porcini each season. Let me see what else I have here for us on. I think that covers what I wanted to discuss with porcini. Does anybody have a question down there? Now, I will tell the people that are listening, if you haven't entered our contest, make sure you do it. We're going to give away a book, I think at the end of the video or tonight, and we'll send out an email to everybody. But there's not a lot of people that signed up with everything that's going on. So you have a very good chance of winning a copy of the book right now. Let's see, what mushroom should we talk about next? The other kind of third really big mushroom, you probably know what that is, the chanterelle. And those obviously you collect in enormous quantities. And in some ways, all three of these mushrooms speak to why we were inspired to write a book. And that was this idea that there's so much bounty in the woods, we would come home with a whole basket of one of these types of mushrooms and have to figure out what to do with them so we didn't waste them, and really want to enjoy mushrooms for a whole year after we collected them. I mean, look, anybody can cook up a fresh mushroom in butter and you're going to like it. But what do you do to really save these mushrooms and get the most out of them for if not a year, even for years? And that's why we have so many of these preservation techniques we've been testing, and also why that's the focus of the book, is the recipes really focus on using preserved mushrooms, not fresh ones. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the chanterelle. Now the chanterelle is, unlike the porcini and the morel, it is a very finicky little beast. I really don't enjoy a chanterelle when it's dried. I find it doesn't have a texture I like. It just doesn't excite me. I do think if you are going to dry them, you might try letting them slowly dehydrate, maybe in the fridge before you put them in a dehydrator at a really low temperature. That might make them better. You might powder them, but all that said, I just don't like to eat them dried. So what we do is we freeze them. The top way to preserve chanterelles, I think most people know, is you freeze them, you saute them in that pan, they give up their liquid, and then you pop them in your plastic bag and your good plastic, and you freeze them, and that works great. That's not rocket science either. I have, or I should say we have, because Kristen and I have been working on these for years, we have a couple of other favorite ways to preserve the chanterelle. The one is called a duxelle. I wish I had some pictures, or I wish I had some to share here. We have had, 3 really bad chanterelle years here now in a row in Colorado, and I've eaten all my duxelle. I am pleased to say that it lasts 3 years in the freezer. It really is a good technique to store the chanterelle, and and we keep our freezer pretty cold, by the way. So I think that is also a factor on how well your product stays in the freezer as we turn it down. Because, your freezer, you can set it at 20 degrees or 0 or 20 below 0. And the 20 below 0 is going to keep your food longer. So with the duxelle, the recipe's in the book. It's a little too detailed to get into right now. But basically, you take a big old Dutch oven. We have a big one. And we put in a ton of chanterelles in it. First we saute up a couple of onions, and then we throw a bunch of chanterelles in it. And the secret ingredient is dried apricots. We are fortunate here. We have a lot of apricots around us that we can use. You can just buy store-bought dried apricots, chop them into smaller pieces, add those to the mix. We pour in a bunch of stock. We use vegetable stock, but any stock you prefer is great. We put in a whole bunch of sherry, dry sherry in that. And then we put it in the oven and we cook it down. We usually keep the lid off because we're trying to get a lot of the moisture out of the chanterelles. And we stir it every 30 minutes at about 350 degrees because it will get kind of burn on top. And after maybe 90 minutes, it is a thick, wonderful tasting, mushroomy, and I don't even know how to explain it. And we freeze it in bags. Now it comes right out of the freezer from there, and it's ready to go. And that's one of the beauties of it, is it's kind of ready to add to pastas or cream sauces, or I kind of like it like on a baked potato, or you can put it on top of meat. There's so many things you can do with this recipe. And a duxelle itself as a technique works with a lot of mushrooms. We have a porcini duxelle recipe in the cookbook that is pretty good too, and it just freezes up pretty nice. So that's probably for us our favorite way to preserve the chanterelle. We would rather probably have bags of duxelle in our freezer than bags of just straight frozen chanterelles. The other favorite way is freeze drying, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit. And then we have 2 pretty unique little products we like to make with chanterelle. The first one I am drinking right now. It's very good. We made it last fall, and it is it's in a bottle. You can't really see it. It's called Shrub. And what Shrub is we take equal parts by weight of sugar, You could do volume 2. I don't think it really matters. Equal parts of sugar, white vinegar, or champagne vinegar, or your favorite vinegar, and mushroom. And we parboil or simmer or whatever, boil it for 15 minutes. And then we strain all the mushrooms off. And what you're left with is a really wonderful drinking vinegar. And it's sweet and it's sour. And what you do is you pour this into a soda water, and it makes a fun soda. And we do 2 types. This is actually Matsutake shrub is what that's called, drinking vinegar. And we do a Chanterelle vinegar, which they both taste pretty good and they last in the fridge for about a year. But we also do lots of other foraged items. We have pinyon pine cone shrub in the fridge right now, and choke cherry shrub in the fridge. We like to work some honey in because we have a honey in our family. So it's easy to start putting honey into the shrub if you like the honey flavor instead of sugar. We prefer white vinegar, we prefer champagne vinegar over white vinegar, feeling it has a better flavor. However, you can use whatever you want. We are not such the fan of apple cider vinegar, but other people love it. Okay, so let's see what's next on there. That's the chanterelle. So we freeze them. We don't dry them. We freeze dry. We don't dehydrate them. We freeze dry them. I'll talk about in a little bit. And we do shrub and jam and other techniques for the chanterelle. The next one is the oyster mushroom, which I don't know for you, it's always traditionally been hard for me to get excited about. I've collected them and cooked them up fresh, and they're okay. I just don't get excited about them. However, I've had 2 developments that have changed my mind on that front, maybe 3. Here's the first one. We got some better recipes, and they're in our book. We were lucky enough that one of our foragers who's in the book, her name is Hua, and some others, but especially Hua, shared some absolutely phenomenal oyster mushroom recipes that did not include butter. There are totally different preparations of oyster mushrooms. They're very Asian inspired, and they're delightful. So I do like to now, I've got a few recipes that I like to use oysters for. I often use the fresh oysters for that. I don't preserve too many oysters. I do have quite a few dried ones that I can just mix into foods when I need some extra mushroomy flavor. My favorite way, though, to preserve the oysters now that they don't keep, I can't show you because we've eaten them all. And as soon as we make them, they don't sit around, is we make jerky. Oyster jerky is superb, and you can also make it with chanterelles, and that's also excellent. We have recipes for that in the book, but basically we take the mushroom, we parboil it for a few minutes until it kind of shrinks in size a little bit, and then we marinate it overnight in the fridge in a jerky flavoring. Now, there's all kinds of different jerky flavorings. You can look them up. I prefer a soy sauce based one with some sort of sugar or maple syrup is ideal, or even honey. I love cracked pepper in it. A little bit of that gives a little bit of hot, along with maybe a little cayenne. I like a little Worcestershire sauce in mine. I mix all that together. I taste it. It's pretty good. I marinate overnight, and then I lay these oysters or chanterelles out into my food dehydrator and run it at a low temperature until they're kind of not crispy, but still firm and chewy and bendy. And then you can store them in vacuum sealed bags. They'll last a long time. I don't know how long because we've eaten them all. They're so good. It's just a really nice way to save those mushrooms that I have always thought were best fresh, and even fresh I didn't get too excited about. The other way I do like to save them is pickling. And I'm going to talk about pickling here in a minute too. So I do like to pickle my oysters as well, and they're pretty good. I wonder if anybody has any questions on oysters here before we continue. No. Let's go to hedgehogs next. Hedgehogs kind of remind me a little bit of oysters and chanterelles. They have similar qualities to me. Like the oyster, they're a very mild mushroom. They don't pack a lot of flavor. They can be overpowered in a lot of dishes. And so I usually want to put them into dishes where they're mild flavor and they're a little bit of sweetness is going to hold up, or in dishes where I want to have some mushrooms in them, but I don't need the flavor. So with hedgehogs, I usually freeze them. They do not dehydrate well. Here's an example. We were just in, I think these are from Wisconsin, maybe Minnesota. We were just out there, and they had a lot of hedgehogs, and we froze them up. These are in those fun camper bags, since we didn't have all the vacuum sealing equipment. We just had our battery powered thing in our camper. We packed them into here after wet sauteing them out, and then froze them. And they're really nice this way. Definitely the way that I like to preserve them. The other way that I really like, let me just put that back in my cooler here. The other way, it's time to talk about pickling. With chanterelles and oysters and hedgehogs, and I love to pickle them. Look, pickling works with all kinds of mushrooms for sure. We pickle morels; they're delicious, especially those fun little ones that you often find are really nice pickled. They're beautiful. We've pickled porcinis; they're pretty good too. I think a lot of mushrooms pickle well. Now we have three ways we pickle. And the first way is a traditional pickling. That would be like this. These are chanterelles. And what we do, we hot pickle. We basically parboil the chanterelles. And the reason is if you don't parboil your mushrooms before you pickle, you put them in your jar, you pour hot liquid on them, and you end up with 1/3 a jar of mushrooms and 2/3 a jar of liquid. If you cook your mushrooms a little bit and shrink them down and then put the hot liquid on them, you're going to get a jar like this that's packed full, which is, much more economical. And then we can these. We put them in boiling water for 25 minutes where we are at our elevation. Now, our pickling liquid for this technique is kind of a standard pickling liquid. We use 1 part vinegar, 1 part water. And then we put in 1 tablespoon of kosher salt for every cup of liquid. And we put in 1 teaspoon of sugar for every cup of liquid. Now, it's important you use kosher salt because salts have different saltiness by volume. And if you use table salt, and by the way, I'm using Morton's kosher salt, not the diamond. And if you use those, you'll have to look it up online and adjust your recipes a little bit because they're actually might be too salty. I'm just going to see if we have any other things in the chat here. Looking good there. I did notice in the chat, yeah, Erin Brown, she's in your group. She's the one that gave us the awesome jerky recipes. They're very good. So this is hot pickled. Now here's my problem with hot pickling. These are super slimy. When you take them out of this jar, and porcinis are the same way, you pull them out and they just are, it's hard to get over the sliminess of them. And so what you got to do is you got to cook these into meals. You got to put them in a pan and you got to saute them again, and they'll lose their sliminess, and you can kind of incorporate them into food. I think you can also, depending how comfortable you are with pickling, you can measure the pH on these, and you can use less vinegar, which is going to make them less vinegary, which will also make them better in some dishes. So pickling is a really good way, especially as you learn how to do it and you can measure your pH and make sure it stays at a safe level. You can hot pickle product and keep it on a shelf. This is shelf stable for long periods of time. It's a very traditional and very great way to preserve your mushrooms. And then again, the trick is you're cooking with these. You're not laying them out for, appetizers like you might with other pickled products. You're actually really incorporating them into a meal. I'll talk about that in a sec, some more. The second way we pickle is right here. These are the hedgehogs, and this is cold pickled. This is my favorite way. And in this technique, we do the same thing. We are heating up the mushroom, getting it reduced in size, packing it tightly into a jar, pouring our pickling liquid over top of it, and then we're letting it come to room temperature for an hour, and then we're going to put it in the fridge. And this has to stay in the fridge. It is not a shelf-stable product. However, the texture on these is really nice when they're pickled that way. You can open them up and you can eat them, and you can put them back in the fridge, and they'll last for several months that way. It seems like they're pretty good. They're squeaky. which is really what I like, a really firm squeakiness, really nice texture that if I had hot cooked these to make shelf stable, they're going to have a different texture. Now, when you cook these, again, you can put them out and eat them with a toothpick, which is fun. They taste pretty good. By the way, for the seasoning for our standard mix, then we put in our seasoning in the jar. We use dill, a sprig of dill, a couple of peppercorns, a clove of garlic, a pinch of spicy. So that's usually a dried pepper or pepper flakes, and some mustard seed is good too. Kind of just a standard pickling, the one we like. There's so many ways to make your pickling juice though, depending what flavors you like. I like it just a little spicy. But then you can take these out and cook with them too, and they're going to give a nice pizzazz to your food. For instance, just the other night we were making stuffed bell peppers with, we don't eat meat, so we were using like a fake meat product and wild rice, and it was good. It was savory, but it needed mushrooms. And what it really needed was a little sour, tangy mushroom. So we opened up a jar of these and we mixed them into the bell peppers, and it really enhanced the dish in a big way. So that's the other kind of cool thing about pickled mushrooms, are often that sourness they bring will really enhance a lot of dishes, just like often a lemon juice or lemon zest will do the same thing for you. And they're kind of a little salty because that's how we like to make them. So they also bring some salt to the mix. Of course, you can adjust the recipe for kind of how you see fit, but these are what we call cold pickled. Now, the third pickling technique came from Olga Craddock Cotter. That's, if you know Mushroom Mountain and Trad Cotter, that's his wife. And she gave us some really good recipes that we love. And one of them is this one, quick pickling. And this is weird. This is surprisingly good. I know Kristen was pretty dubious, and I made it for somebody else recently. They're like, what? And what you do, same thing, you parboil your mushrooms, shrink them down, and then you pack them in a jar. And all you do is go to the grocery store and get your whatever you like a vinegar-based salad dressing, and you pour it over top of it, and you're done. You let it sit for a day or a week or two. I usually don't keep them much more than 2 weeks. And they're like what would you call these kind of pickles? They're seasoned pickles. They're great to serve to guests. These are the kind of things I might put on a toothpick or mix into a salad, like a pasta salad. The flavor you get is going to be based on the type of salad dressing you choose in this case. But super fast, super easy, and it's something we often do, like when we're like traveling and we want to preserve some of our food. We'll just use this pickling technique, and people love it. It's fun and easy. So I recommend you give that a try. Vodka, we got some vodka questions. That is coming up. I promise we're gonna get to vodka soon. But first, I was still on the hedgehogs, and I was saying I like to freeze the hedgehogs, not dehydrate them. They're really not good dehydrated, I don't think. In fact, they're probably one of the worst mushrooms to dehydrate, in my opinion. The next one is the Matsutake. Now, that is a really unusual mushroom. Love it or hate it, I think a lot of Americans have not really developed the taste for that particular mushroom yet. And certainly it's unique. If you've cooked with it, you know that you probably aren't cooking it in butter or oil. It seems to really like to be cooked in water, brings the flavor and the smell out. It can preserve in a lot of different ways. You can dehydrate them for sure. You can freeze them. So I'm going to talk about two things with Matsutake initially. One is I like to freeze them. And the way I do that is I slice them pretty thin because they can be a little chewy. And I put them in a big pot with just a little bit of water and cook them for 5 minutes. And again, they tend to reduce in size. And then I freeze them. And they really store well that way. And what I like to do, let me show you here. Here's an example of a bag of frozen Matsutake. I'm just going to grab another one out of here. I got 3 examples of them here. This bag here is another one. This is from 2017, I think. Very thinly frozen. This is how I like to do these, extra thin, because what I do is I open these up, and Matsutake is such a strong flavored mushroom. And when I'm making like a soup, especially an Asian soup, a ramen, I like ramen. I love to just open this up. And when they're really thin like this, you can just snap off and break off like just the size piece that you want and throw it into your ramen and put this back in the freezer. So I'll be breaking this down and cooking with it. You know, same with this one. This is almost too thick to break easily, but that's how I do these. And you can see these are all like Matsutake buttons in there. And the freezing really saves the Matsutake flavor very nicely. This is a good example. This is bag, there's a Ziploc bag. It's frozen in there, and you can see all the freezer burn going on in here. It's less than a year old, and already I feel like it's degrading and going downhill. This kind of plastic, just a standard, you know, Ziploc style bag, it just does not preserve food in the freezer near as long as something like this. Let me put this back in my cooler. So that's how I preserve most of my Matsutake, and I do find that they come out of the freezer very well and cook up well. Another way I will freeze those, and also porcini buttons, is the real small ones, the really nice buttons I will put into the freezer whole. And then when they're frozen, I'll wrap them in a layer of plastic, and then I'll wrap them in a layer of tinfoil. And by the way, I've tried both plastic and I've tried tinfoil, and it's better to use both. You get a much better product. And then after that, I will often, because they're usually small, golf ball size for me, I will pack them into a plastic and vacuum seal them into that. And you can have whole buttons. And whole buttons are kind of fun to use for different foods. I don't know that they taste any better than the kind of frozen in their own juice technique, but it's just nice to have the button occasionally to cook with. Now then, I've dried Matsutake, and you know, they work. I have noticed they seem to lose their essence a lot more quickly. Like if you get a 2-year-old dried Matsutake, it just is not as exciting in the mouth. So I do prefer the freezing technique for those. Now the other way I love to preserve them is with a freeze dryer, and I think I want to talk about freeze drying now and show a few examples. First, let me do this. Let me show you a freeze dryer. Let's see, I've got one. Oh, I thought I had one. Maybe I won't show a picture of a freeze dryer. A freeze dryer, it comes from a company called Harvest Right, and it's pretty big. It's like a small refrigerator, and it has some big disadvantages. Let me tell you about those first. Number one, it's expensive. It's $2,500 to $3,500. It uses a fair bit of energy to freeze dry products. It doesn't do a lot of product. I have the 4-shelf one, and I probably get a quart of product per shelf and a gallon in the whole operation, maybe more if I can pack it more tightly. It takes 36 hours to do. So there's some big disadvantages there around it, and it's kind of loud in your garage. However, it gives you a preserved product that is like no other. It lasts a long, long time. In fact, this product is especially popular with preppers who freeze dry food that will last 25 years when stored properly. Not only do the preppers, by the way, use those oxygen scrubber packs, they also like to not use plastic like I've been showing you. They actually use Mylar. Now, I got a bunch of Mylar bags. They're kind of expensive. I don't use them for my mushrooms because I'm not looking for 25 years. But that's what they use because it lets less air pass than even plastic, and it also creates a fully dark environment, which helps. But with the freeze dryer, you get a highly nutritious product that lasts a long time, and it also gives you a way to capture like this ineffable quality of fresh mushrooms. So I'll give you a couple examples here. I'm going to start. We're going to talk about lobster mushrooms, and if any of you have dried lobster mushrooms, I've got a bunch here. Like they look like this in a plastic bag. They're kind of small and They lose some of their color. You know, they taste good. It's a good way to preserve them, to cook with. There, by the way, is my oxygen pack in there. So this is packed away for the long run. However, gosh, if you freeze dry these guys, here's my freeze dry. I'm gonna pop, you hear that? It's vacuum sealed. And here's my little oxygen pack on top. But boy, when you freeze dry them, let me just pull a few samples out of here. Those are good. Look how, oh, and the smell, smells totally like lobster mushrooms. And it makes these beautiful white, like they look like fresh mushrooms. Now these will rehydrate up really quick, like a few seconds to a minute with a little bit of water. And these guys will be rehydrated. And they cook up pretty well. I do find when I rehydrate a freeze-dried mushroom that it has a lot of water in it, too much. It seems to absorb too much water. And so I often saute them in a pan with no butter, just to kind of cook some of the extra liquid off them. And once they get back to that liquid level that I want, then I might introduce some butter or oil into the pan. But these are just like fresh, and they are absolutely beautiful. They also do not shrink. So they're about 90% of their original size. Now that's going to work really well with chanterelles. These are Oregon chanterelles. These are several years old, and these were given to me by somebody who had gotten a freeze dryer, and they sent me these, and they smell pretty good. They do fade. The chanterelles fade just a little bit, but they're just like really light, and they have all of their kind of texture still to them. And when you rehydrate these guys, they're really like working with fresh mushrooms. And for recipes, they can be hard to distinguish if you work them properly. So here's two fun versions. We talk crudo for porcini, right? There's a couple of mushrooms you can eat raw. Matsutake and porcini are two of them that people eat raw in small amounts. You know, it's fun to slice up a porcini really thin and put some oil and pepper on it and eat it like a little appetizer. Crudo, I think you would call it. I'm gonna pop this one open. These are fun though. Let's see if I can find a good example in here. These are porcinis that I have mandolined out really thin. I'm trying to find one that looks like a little button, but these were the finest little buttons that I could find. Porcini buttons. They look how paper thin, and they taste fresh. They're freeze dried though. They're dried. They taste so good raw like this. So I kind of do that with some raw ones because they're fun. You can do that with here's some little Matsutake buttons. Same idea. I'm gonna have to vacuum seal all these guys up when we're done. You know, here's one here. This one's more of an open. It's probably not a number one. It's just a small one. And oh, they smell so good. They smell fresh. I can't even describe how wonderful these Matsutake smell that are over a year old. And I find this is a fun way to preserve Matsutakes and really keep their essence, because dehydrating simply doesn't do that. And you know, freezing does to some degree. Here are freeze-dried morels. They're not any better than dried, but boy, they look better. They're huge. They keep all their size. They look really good in the jar. They're quite a treat. Now with the freeze dryer, the other thing is it's pretty expensive. I doubt you can really justify having one just to, you know, store your mushrooms. So I want to show you some other fun things before I move on. Down here it is. I often freeze dry extra herbs. You know, you buy your herbs, you buy fresh rosemary or like lime leaves. Here's 2 lime leaves in here. If I freeze dry fresh herbs, they stay like fresh herbs. And when I need fresh herbs for a recipe and I don't want to go buy, you know, a $4 package of rosemary, I can open this up and I've got them right in here. And they truly are, they're not dried. These aren't dried herbs that are in your cupboard. These are freeze dried and they have the essence of a fresh herb. So that's a fun thing to do with them. You can dry like all kinds of garden products, like your tomatoes, your little cherry tomatoes from your garden. These were those little yellow ones. Freeze drying makes sweeter products sweeter, sour products more sour, and hot products more hot. If you freeze dry lemons, you'll be like super sour. You freeze dry peppers, they will light you up. They're so hot. They're kind of fun that way. These are little wild feral, I should say, apricots that we freeze dried, and they taste great. And I like to do like these are like snack food for the trail. Two more freeze-dried products for you. This is asparagus that we get from our local ditches. Again, it's like trail food. I often season these up a little bit, parboil, season them up, and freeze dry. And then this is a mushroom product here, a freeze-dried mushroom product. This is kind of fun, super handy. I've been using this more recently. So here's what I did. I made, porcini stock, because you get all these big old porcinis, and you can take all their pores and all the old bits and all your cleanings, throw them in the freezer. And when you get a whole bunch, make stock. You can do it with onions and celery and carrots or whatever you make stock with, and cook it down and strain out the bits, and you're left with stock. And then you can still cook it down a little bit. Now at that point, you've got great mushroom stock, which you can freeze. You could dehydrate theoretically. What I do is I put it in the freeze dryer and freeze dry it, and it makes this powder that is like mushroom stock powder that I can just open this up and throw a tablespoon or two into a dish and get some kind of mushroom umami stock, as opposed to, say, using a bouillon cube. So that's also a really way to use a kind of an expensive process. Especially if you can, I like to put them in the freezer, so when I don't have anything else, I can pull stuff out of the freezer, make stock, and run the freeze dryer for a day. To take those bits and pieces that you normally throw away and make something that is absolutely delicious. And again, you would be like, what the heck is this, Trent? If I gave you some to taste, like it is awesome how much umami and how good this is, and mushroomy. And it will last for many, many years in here until I need to use it. All right. Let's see. I got to back it up. I forgot to tell you about my secret chanterelle recipe. Kristen and I do this. So I'm going to back up to chanterelles and talk about this. This is chanterelle jam, which is a great way to preserve a large amount of chanterelles. Here's a smaller one. I'll talk about why you do different sizes in a minute. What you do is you take your chanterelles and you put them in a food processor and grind them all up. And then you put them in a pan or a pot, and you leave the lid off, it doesn't matter. Cook them down a little bit to where they're like cooked, and they'll be kind of juicy. And they'll have about the same level of liquid as fruit that you're going to make jam with. And what we do is we use half apricot and half chanterelle. So when you buy the little jam boxes that you make jam with, the gelatin, they have recipes in them. We follow the apricot recipe, except we mix in half of the cooked chanterelle that, food processed and then kind of cooked down, and replace half of the apricot with that chanterelle mix. And then we just go through the process and we jam it up. Now we keep this in the fridge. It's a super savory jam. It's sweet because it's got all that sugar in it that makes gelatin, and it's pretty, it's different batches here. This one's a little looser. You can see this one's a lot tighter. It doesn't move around. And you can put it on toast. You can treat it like jam. Our favorite recipe, though, what we almost always do with this is we make that baked brie, where you buy a brie, and not a real big one for this whole jar, and you cut a puck or a hole out of the middle, and you dump this whole jar of jam into the top of it. And I'm going to tell you what. Don't skimp on the jam. It's the best part of the dish. And if you don't use a lot of jam and you start eating this, you're going to be like trying to get jam in every bite, and you're going to wish you did more. And then we wrap that in the puff pastry or the crescent dough stuff that comes out of those pot pans, the Pillsbury, whatever, and wrap that up, and we bake it in the oven, and it comes out like this round, baked, beautiful product that you cut into, and it oozes out brie and oozes out jam, and it's just delightful. And it's just crazy how well this preserve. So we do a batch of these every year. Well, we try to. We don't always get them here in Colorado. These have lasted for us now at least 2 years in the fridge. They do pretty well. This is a newer one. This is from last year. But we do keep them in the fridge. And the reason is I know jam is shelf stable. I'm not really sure if you mix mushrooms into jam if it's shelf stable. So I keep it in the fridge, and I also think it makes it taste good. So good stuff. Now I recommend you try this with your chanterelle and serve that jam up to people. You'll blow their minds. All right, so sorry, I kind of backward up to chanterelles there. I was talking about the matsutake. I was talking about freeze drying and how if you're going to do it, you better figure out how to take advantage of a lot of different other food products with it to make it economical. It's probably, frankly, it's probably a good device to go in with a friend on and share, so you can kind of run it all the time and get the maximum value out of. Oh, I got one more to show. We got pretty good peaches here in Colorado. This is another favorite. We freeze dry sliced peaches, and they taste so good. They're like fruit candy when you eat them. Astronauts have it pretty good with that freeze dried food in space, as far as I'm concerned. Next, we're gonna move to lobster mushrooms. I already showed some freeze dried lobsters. We dry lobsters, we freeze lobsters. I think strictly for kind of economical purposes, we typically dehydrate them and rehydrate them. A couple of weird things about lobsters, I feel like I've noticed that they taste different. I feel like if you mix different lobster batches that you've harvested together, or maybe not tasted them, that some lobster mushrooms taste better than others, and that's kind of frustrating when you have some and you're like, these just aren't as good as they should be. And I don't know why. I wish I knew more about that. But they do dehydrate pretty well. Now, one of our favorite things to do with lobster is to make powder with it. And this recipe came from Alan Virgo in Wisconsin or Minnesota. And it's a really brilliant recipe. So he dehydrates his lobsters, and then he turns them into powder. So I got some powders here. And no, I don't have any powders here. One recommendation for the powders is you don't do it and store it long term. You're going to have a better powder if you grind it closer to when you use it. Now it'll keep for a while, but a powder won't keep 2 years in powder form in your cupboard, as well as a well-stored mushroom will for 2 years. So powder kind of as you need it. But he uses the lobster powder to encrust fish with before he either sautés them or fries them or broils them. And it's really good. Somehow the lobster mushroom really complements the fish very nicely, and is really well done. So that's one of our favorite recipes for the lobster mushroom. Although, like, you can preserve it in many different ways. I don't know that a lot of people really love the lobster mushroom. I enjoy it, but I don't know that it's a favorite with people. Now, I do want to back up one more time and show you salt. I've got some salt here. And then we're going to talk about candy caps and truffles and some medicinal mushrooms. I've got so much stuff here to show. Oh, here it is. I got 2 types of salts. I got some porcini salt. This is just ground porcini added to salt. Nice seasoning to put into your food. Ready to go. And this is morel salt, a little different technique though. This is from Brian Barzy. He gifted us with this recently. And this is a great thing to do if you have large quantities of, say, burn morels. What you do is you lay your fresh morels in beds of salt, cover them with salt, put more morels in and more salt. And the salt's going to extract all the liquid out of the morels. And then you really at a really low temperature, like as low as your stove will go, 90 degrees would be great, 100 degrees. You very slowly bake the salt so that the moisture comes out of it. And after that, you put it back into like a blender or a mixer or whatever you use to grind things with to take it back to salt, because it'll be all stuck together and clumpy. And it's morel salt. And it smells really morelly. Is that a word, morelly? Really a fun way to preserve things and then gift people. It's a really nice salt. Now, I am allergic to morels. I don't like this. I don't like the smell, really. I don't like the taste. I keep eating morels thinking I'm going to enjoy them, but they make me throw up. And no matter how I prepare them, they make me throw up. And over the last couple of years, as I keep trying to eat them, I've come to the point where I actually don't like them. And you can probably imagine why. I've probably got a lot of bad associations with the taste of morels. See if we had any other questions flowing in here in the chat that I need to answer. I think it looks pretty good there. So that's the salt. Let's go now to candy caps, which are really fun. You know where to find those in Oregon. Here's a jar of candy caps, which are just another really unique mushroom that like a matsutake, and in my opinion, also yellow feet and black trumpets, which I'm going to talk about next. But definitely the candy cap and the matsutake, you have special recipes for these. You don't cook these up the normal way. Now you can eat them fresh. We don't really do that because when we're out camping, you know, we're traveling, it's not really conducive to be cooking up fresh candy caps. I don't have any wisdom on fresh preparation, but with these, you want to dry them and you want to slow dry them. You're going to get your maximum flavor and smell if you don't run your dehydrator at full temp. Now, I didn't really believe that until I tested it, and now I do believe it. In fact, I would say when you're going to cook with these, then take them out and let them get a little natural moisture in them for a day or two before you introduce them and totally rehydrate them. I think they even have more flavor. There's something about that process that brings out the maximum kind of candy cap flavor. And you can do a lot of fun things with these once they're dried. One of them, just strictly from a preservation technique, is right here. This is bourbon, I think is what it is. Is what you would call it. And we took a bunch of bourbon, filled this jar up, and we put, I think, 12 candy caps in it for a week. Dried candy caps, I want to say, not wet ones. And you might want to experiment with slightly moist ones to get a little more flavor, but it wasn't quite enough. So we put 12 more. So there's 24 candy caps in here. And since they're dried, it's pretty shelf stable. You could try the same thing, for instance, with vodka and chanterelles or vodka and yellowfeet with fresh versions there. I think you want to store it in the freezer though after they sit for a while, because that's a lot of liquid you're introducing into your booze. I'm not sure how well that would keep in the cupboard. Although I have memories of my parents having jars of booze filled with fruit in their cupboards that seem to last for decades. So maybe it is okay. But for this, it's totally shelf stable, and it really packs a lot of candy cap flavor, which you can then do fun things with. I'll let you figure out what you're going to do with your candy cap booze. But it is a good way to preserve your candy caps. The other thing is when you cook with the candy cap, especially the whole ones, you can, after you cook with them, put them back in the freezer and store them in the freezer and then cook with them again and then do it again. And you can often get 2, 3, 4 batches out of a handful of dried candy caps if you move them to the freezer after you use them. You can grind your candy caps and do the same thing. You can save that kind of ground powder after you put it into like a sugary liquid, for instance. Maybe you're making like a candy cap syrup. You can preserve the ground bits too and reuse them. It's a little harder because they're ground. That's why you might want to use the whole candy cap for that process. But you can reuse them. They tend to save their flavor. We'll credit Julie Schreiber for that tip. She is a candy cap expert, if you know her. She's a Pacific Northwest chef. Let's see what else we got going on here. We got black trumpets and yellow feet. I was going to say black feet. Here's a jar of dried yellow feet. And I got a jar of dried black trumpets. Both of these are great. I will say, I think we're doing a class for the Mount Pisgah thing fair, and we're doing a really nice recipe with these and combined. We call it a Craterella Skelette. That came from Julie Schreiber too. Really good recipe. And I think, and I should say Kristen, this is really her thought process too, is that dried yellow feet are awesome. They're not so good other preparations, in our opinion. I know people like to freeze black trumpets too. I feel like they're so good dried that if they're incrementally a little bit better frozen, it's not really worth the effort. We love dried yellow feet though. And a lot of people walk by these guys, Craterellus tubiformis. Or as we learned recently, we had somebody online call them tubies. I like that. So that's our new name. We're calling these tubies. We actually have two different species in here of Craterellus. There's another one collected from Minnesota, very similar, that we've combined into this. But we love to cook with those in black trumpets. They have a very unique flavor and smell, and we think they're quite delicious. And we tend to use unique recipes for them as well. We often with our black trumpets cook them in ways that we don't use other mushrooms for that same recipe unless they're yellow feet. So that's something to keep in mind as you try to kind of cook with those mushrooms. They dehydrate really well and rehydrate great. But you might not want to just be sauteing them up and eating them. I love Asian-inspired recipes with them. We do a rice with dashi in it and mirin that's really quite nice with the black trumpets. Pretty good stuff. Lobster powder encrusted salmon. Yeah, that sounds really good. There's something about, I would try this when you encrust your fish, smell the lobster mushrooms, and then that smell seems to really come out in the fish when you cook it. There's something about that seems to just work really well. And yeah, Kristen's saying in the chat there, quite so, the yellowfoot flavor really enhances when it's dried. I think it's maybe better dried than fresh. Maybe that's why people walk by it as they pick some fresh, and they're small and you got to get on your knees to collect them. But when you cook them fresh, I don't think they're as good as when you dry them. So try it, try drying them and see how you like it. I've also tried freeze drying both of these, and I don't think they really enhance the flavor enough to be worth the effort, especially after eating them dried, which is the way we prefer. Okay, I'm going to make a little space here, and we're going to move into our last couple species here. Truffles, I don't have a lot to say about. They're in the book. We're lucky that Joseph Crawford is one of the contributors to the book. Chef Joe, as you guys know him, has some absolutely astonishing recipes in the book. And he has really brought us up to speed on what to do with truffles as well. He shared a lot of his chefing experience with us. And truffles are great. And if you get some truffles, we don't forage them. We laugh. I can't even get our dogs to like sit. I'm surprised they haven't been running around wreaking havoc while I'm doing the presentation. I think Kristen has them locked up. Let alone find truffles. Goodness, that would be crazy if our dogs could do that. But we buy them. And the trick with the truffle, I think, if you're going to preserve them, is you don't preserve them. What you do is you infuse other foods with them. And so if you get that truffle, try putting it into an airtight container, like a piece of Tupperware, with food that has fat in it, like crazy foods even. Avocados are kind of crazy. Eggs, the truffle essence goes through the shell and through the white and stays in the yolk. And you cook that egg up, the yolk will have a truffle essence in it, and none of the other egg will. Part of the egg. Butter is my favorite. It just absorbs a ton of truffle essence, and then you can cook with it and make the most amazing dishes with truffle butter. I think that's my favorite way. You can use cheese, you can use nuts, you can use all this stuff, but at the end of the day, nothing beats a couple of sticks of truffle butter to make grilled cheeses with, and whatever you want to cook with it. It's astonishingly good. All right, so that's kind of it for the truffles. A couple of medicinal mushrooms. I will say in the cookbook, we also talk about chaga, chicken of the woods, maitake, and lion's mane. And I know some of that can be found in Oregon, not the chaga, but I'm not going to talk about those today. We both love chaga. It's a wonderful medicinal mushroom. If you get a chance to get some dried chaga and maybe make, it's over there, I won't get it, maybe make tea out of it. It makes a really, quite a delightful, like a black tea that is really nice to drink, and also a lot of medicinal qualities. We do collect the reishi though. And what we do with reishi, we do two things typically. One is we make a tincture, and in the book we have the tincture recipe from Trad Cotter, who is an expert in this matter. Here's some, like a lifetime supply. We put them into little squeezer bottles, and then I'll squeeze one dropper full into my coffee every morning. And it tastes horrible in my opinion. Yuck. But basically, you soak. I'll talk about the tincturing in a minute. You can also make tea out of it. You can simmer the reishi in hot water for a period of time and make a really foul tasting medicinal drink. Sorry, I don't like it. I know people do. In the book, though, we were fortunate. You may not know Eleanor Shabbat. She's from the East Coast, and mushroom hunters are like rap stars, East and West Coast. They seem to not like mix for whatever reason. And oh my gosh, she has the best reishi tea technique. And what she does is more like mulled hot cider. She simmers the reishi and with apples in it and honey and lemon and cinnamon and more of that stuff and simmers it. And when you're done, you have this really nice hot tea that's lemony and cinnamony and appley and not too reishi-y. So it's really quite delightful. So we have that recipe is one of my favorite things to do with reishi right now, other than making a tincture if I'm going to try to consume it for medicinal uses too. Because the other thing is, if you're going to consume it, you want to try to get a fair amount of it into you. And I think that hot tea is a good way to go. Turkey tails are pretty common there too. Now, turkey tails, again, need with reishi for preservation. By the way, the secret is after you collect it, cut it up while it's still moist. If you let it dry, it's hard as a rock. It's hard to work with. So we get like a serrated, like one of those cheap Ginzu knives or any kind of knife, and you just get at it and you saw that reishi into thin strips that then you can make into tea. Oh, here it is right here. All right, here's a jar of reishi. Now this is the reishi oregensis, which is from Oregon. There's a Ganoderma oregensis, I should say. There's also a Ganoderma from the East Coast, which is the lucidum or something, which is the kind of traditional reishi. I think they're the same. They certainly taste the same to me, bitter. Turkey tail, some definite tips for turkey tail. Here's some here in a horrid Ziploc bag, but there's a reason for that. We just got this turkey tail 2 weeks ago. Doesn't really have much of a smell. And when you collect it, you want to try to get really nice turkey tail, really white on the bottom if possible. When you collect them, they should be flexible and kind of squeaky. You can bend them over and they're almost like squeaky when you rub it against each other. It should be a really nice consistency. You don't want the old ones. Then we dehydrate them. And we've always said, that's good enough. But some people will say, you should freeze turkey tail because they have bugs in them. And the bugs do not survive or survive the dehydration process. I'm like, yeah, that's cool. Well, I opened up a jar of turkey tail recently, and lo and behold, they'd been eaten by bugs. There were dead bugs in the bottom of the jar, and the turkey tails looked like something had been eating them very clearly, and I had to throw the whole jar out. So what you want to do is these. I dehydrated them. I have had them in the freezer for a week now, and they're pretty dry. They still feel just a little soft after being in the freezer. So I'm going to put them back in the dehydrator for an hour, touch them off, get them to the level I want, and then I'll pack them into a long-term storage facility, which is my plastic bag. Now, what I do, though, with the turkey tail, and I don't know if there's other good things to do with them as I make this tincture, too. Same thing. This time I ground the turkey tail up, and I followed Trad's recipe, which is, I forget the quantities. He gives you the recipe for how much, but I find usually when you put in your powder, usually the Everclear is what you use for this. Will cover up and leave another half again as much liquid on top. Seems to be about the right proportion. You can measure it out, and it probably comes pretty close to this. And then I let this sit for 2 weeks at least. And then I will pour off the vodka, and I'll replace it with hot water, and I might cook it hot for a little while, even maybe for an hour, or let it sit in hot water for a day or two, kind of get the last out, and then I'll combine those two into a tincture. And I use Trad's recipe, which is about 25% Everclear to 75% water. And that way it's not too alcohol-y, which will destroy the medicinal qualities, and it's not too watery, which will go bad on you. So that works. Sometimes for other ones, I'll just mention here, which I guess I don't have here somewhere. Yeah, here it is. This, I thought it was this. These look the same. Let's see. This is reishi tea, by the way. Another thing I took. No, it looks like it. That's mushroom stock. Sometimes they look the same. You can take the reishi tea and dehydrate it into a powder, or you can put it in a freeze dryer and do the same thing. Some people mix it with a really dense reishi tea with flour and then dehydrate, and then you can bake with that flour. That's another way to preserve your reishi and get it into your belly is that way. This is lion's mane, but the concept is similar. I did the same preservation technique or the same tincture technique, and then I put the whole mix into the freeze dryer with the lion's mane fruiting body as well, and turned it into a powder so that I could eat it as a capsule. Now, I know that's probably overkill. I think you can eat raw lion's mane, but that is a way to turn medicinal tinctures and liquids. Chaga, you can do the same thing with. I have a big jar of chaga here I'm doing that with. And then you can put them in the freeze dryer and get them reduced back down to their essence and get all the alcohol and the water removed from them. So that's kind of a fun thing to do with the freeze dryer as well as kind of enhance your medicinal mushrooms. So I think we've got there. We got to the reishi, the turkey tail, the truffle. Let me just look at my list here and make sure I covered all of our fun techniques. I did, so I think we're ready to wrap up. I don't know, Kristen, are we going to do pull a winner out right now, or do we need to maybe wait and kind of figure it out afterwards? Oh, look, Aaron Brown, you're on this right now. Hi, Aaron. I didn't realize you were on here.
Hey, Trent, I think what we should do is have people fill out the form, and then I will download the names tomorrow morning, and we'll use the Google randomizer again, and I will send an email out to folks tomorrow sometime to announce the winners. So we give a little bit more time. Yeah.
I will say two things about that. We're going to give away a knife too. We're going to double down. Can't help myself. I want to show we do these knives. They're fun. I just want to give you guys all a knife tip, and part of preserving and collecting mushrooms is it's hard to beat a brush at the end of your knife. It's pure efficiency. You can wear a brush around your neck and have a separate brush, but it's hard to beat having it on your knife. And they look like this. I will show you though. This is too long. This is gonna get messed up. It's too long. I like to cut them shorter. And if you cut your brushes a little shorter, they're stiffer and they work better. And then if you leave it in your pocket when it's wet or something goes wrong, you might find they're all bent and crooked and they don't work anymore. That's really easy to fix. All you do is put a kettle of hot water on the stove, so it's steaming hot water. And if you apply steam to an animal fur or a feather, it will straighten it back out again. It also works on fishing flies. So that's a great way to keep your boar's hair bristles on these knives that you carry around. When they start to get knackered, you can bring them back to like brand new with like 20 seconds of steam right on them. It's a quick fix. Okay, so we'll send one of these knives out too. All right, unless we have any follow-up questions, I think we're ready to wrap it here. Cheshire, you're still there? Do you want to send us off? Oh, the book. Yeah. You can get the book on our website right now, pre-order. The advantage there is we'll sign it and you're supporting us. You can also get it on Amazon. It's definitely a few bucks cheaper, and they do that free Prime shipping, and you're supporting us too that way. Feel, not trying to guilt you into buying from us. We love to get reviews too. So order it wherever it makes you happy, and we sure hope you enjoy the presentation and the book.
This is Sandy. I'm still here. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, great. Okay, so I'm not sure if Cheshire's still here or not. So I just want to say that I looked at the book and it is unbelievable. I can't wait to have it in my hands. You guys, the photography just blew me away, and just the stories and everything. So I'm really excited to get my book.
Yeah, so. You were one of the 25 foragers who we interviewed and also featured recipes from.
But I tell you what,
from the beginning, thank you for helping us with our book.
Yeah, so. What I said versus what you wrote, I mean, it was just unbelievable.
Oh, your recipes are awesome.
Not that you changed my words or anything. but you guys are good. You guys are really good. So anyway, okay, well, thank you very much. And we will see you again for the festival. Great.
And hopefully in person soon.
Right. Yes. That would be great.
Thank you,
Okay.
everyone.
Have a great evening, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.